Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Geek Bros and Chess. Now, today I'm going to be starting a series called How to Play Chess. Now, this is literally how to play chess, from moving the pieces to creating strategies. So, today we're doing part number one, how to move the pieces. So, let's start with pawns. Now, a pawn is worth 1 point on the board. Now, obviously, points don't mean anything in the game of chess, but it does help you think and make better moves. So, a pawn, um, it on its first move can move 2 squares or 1 square, but after that, a pawn can only move 1 square. Um, and there are a few weird things about pawns. This is one of them. Um, Such as moving twice and then only being able to move once, as well as how a pawn captures. So let's say we go back to pawn a4, and then we have something like knight b5. The pawn is able to capture it. The pawn only captures diagonally, except for a special rule, which I'll show you guys after the video. So pawn b5, and that is how a pawn captures. It captures diagonally. A pawn also cannot move backwards. After pushing the pawn, you cannot move it backwards. You cannot move the pawn backwards. So let's go over that again. A pawn cannot kill a piece like that. Um, it is not possible. A pawn can kill a piece only diagonally. Um, okay, so the next thing about a pawn is a really, really odd move called en passant, which I believe is French for in passing. So let's say we push and he pushes, whatever, and then he pushes to b5. The pawn is actually able to go to b6 and take the pawn, which is called an en passant. En passant, however you want to say it. This can only be done if it is in your opponent's territory, and if the pawns are side by side horizontally, not vertically. For example, you would not be able to en passant that. You would only be able to en passant that, which is really weird, yes, but that is how chess works. Okay, so so about the en passant, it can only be done if the pawn in your opponent's territory moved 2 squares on its first move, and it can only be done on the first move. For example, if instead of en passanting, we decided to go pawn d3, and he went whatever. Now we can no longer en passant. You don't see an option for it anymore. It can only be done on the first move. And the next piece is, let's say, the bishop. The bishop is a pretty straightforward piece, except that it isn't a straightforward piece, it's a diagonal piece. The bishop can move anywhere diagonally. It is best in the center of the board where it can control the most squares, and in the middle it is able to control a lot of squares. However, the bishop also takes diagonally. There's nothing special about that. And yes, that's a bishop. A bishop is worth 3 points of material. Some people will tell you it's worth slightly more, because it is very, very powerful, especially when you have both bishops together, known as the bishop pair. Now, a bishop can never move off its color square. A bishop, the dark bishop as it's called, will never be moved off of a dark square, and the light bishop will never be moved off of a light square. So that is one of the disadvantages of the bishop. It can only control half of the squares on the board. But that's why the bishop pair is so powerful, because when you have both of them, you can control every single square on the board. Okay, the next piece is the rook. The rook is worth 5 points, and it moves basically like a bishop, except instead of diagonal, it moves horizontal and vertical. The rook is worth 5 points, and it doesn't matter where it is in the board, it will always be controlling the same amount of squares unless blocked. That is why it's worth 5 points, because it is always controlling the same amount of squares. I believe that number is 15. The rook is worth 5 points, and it moves horizontally and vertically. So I would not be able to move the bishop there, the rook there, because that is not vertically or horizontally. That is diagonal. The next piece is basically needs no explaining because you already know what it is. It is the queen. The queen is the most powerful piece in the entire game. So it is worth 9 points, and it moves the same as a rook and a bishop put together. That's why it's so powerful. It controls both diagonal and horizontal and vertical squares. So it is an extremely, extremely powerful piece, and it's best not to get it out in the opening. And it is worth 9 points of material. The final piece is called the knight. I saved the knight for last because it is an extremely, extremely difficult piece. Not difficult piece to understand, but difficult piece to play against because it's extremely tricky. And it's also somewhat hard to know how it moves. So knight moves in an L shape. For instance, like that, or like that, or like that, or like that. It moves 2 squares and then 1 square and then 2 squares, 2 squares and then 1 square. It is the only piece that can jump over pieces because even if it's not able to go around it, like for instance, there is no way that this knight can possibly get around any of the pieces, yet it's still able to jump over them. Okay, so that is how all the pieces moves. Come back for the next video. Comment if you want me to keep doing this. As well, I'm hosting a tournament. Comment down below if you would be interested in joining the tournament. The winner gets a chess.com membership. Subscribe.